Ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, we are now at part 2 of our 3-part series with Matt Alderton from BX Networking. Now, if you missed part 1, make sure you go back and have a listen to that, because in that episode, we talked all about Matt's early experiences in building small businesses, the Subway franchises, cafes, and video stores. And in this episode, we discuss how his start in owning and building these small businesses helped to contribute to his next move, which was to start an online payroll rostering business. In this episode, we dig into understanding as well how to use employee share schemes and arrangements in order to increase employee retention, the lessons along the way when selling to a public company, and the importance of timing for your exit. We also really dig into a lot of differences when selling to a private versus a public company buyer, what you need to be aware of when you're selling to a public company, and the differences in selling and the process of negotiation dealing with a public company versus a private buyer. And finally, we also talk about the importance of shareholders agreements. Now, if you missed part 1, don't forget to go back and listen to that. But for now, here we go with part 2 with Matt. I really want to focus on the next big business venture after, you know, the Subways and the video shops. Let's talk about this next business, because there was quite a change in gear for you in terms of your approach, not just because you were not then dealing with franchises, but I guess that is one element. And it'd be interesting to reflect on your the differences that you felt in the businesses there. But let's talk about the next business.
Yeah, so the next business that I started before BX was a business called IWS, which was Integrated Workforce Solutions. And so IWS, I started from what it did, it actually, I talked about this a little bit earlier, it created online rosters. So my management team across all my shops could do their rosters online, and I could have transparency on that. I could see what was happening. Biggest cost in retail is your cost of goods and your wages, and having transparency on that is super important. And there was nothing out there that did that. My first instinct was to go look for something that was available in the marketplace to do it. There was nothing. So I thought, I'll build it so I could do it for my shops. And we had 9 shops in a very short period of time. So it made sense to invest in that. And so what I then did, and I mentioned I was working full time as well. So I was working for this company that had a whole bunch of other retail shops as well. So I wanted to be able to, provide for that as well. And so we built this online rostering payroll solution. So from all the way from who was rostered to who worked and paying them. So it was all automated, knowing that was going to save us a heap of time and save us a heap of money as well. And what we found is that so many people outside of our businesses were looking at because employees work in Subways at not just your shop, but other shops and stuff. And all of a sudden people are asking about it. I'd go to a franchise meeting. I'd be having conversations with other Subway owners about it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you can use it. And like, how much is it going to cost? And I'm like, oh, such and such a week. And like, I'm just pulling numbers out of my head, right, kind of thing. And before we knew it, we were selling that and offering it to there. And then I started to realize the value proposition of what we're doing, and then created the business of IWS, grew it and scaled it within the first probably 3-4 years, brought on 2 key people. One of them is still the CEO of the organization. One of them was a sales manager, and both were just instrumental for the growth of the business. And I always say the best decisions you can make with any new business or any business is the people that you bring on. Hire slow, fire fast, I always say. Make sure you've got the right people, because that first person you hire will either double your capacity or will halve it. So you've got to have the right people in the right seats. And so I was very fortunate. The first two people that I recruited for the organisation, one is still the CEO today, and he was the operations manager at the time, and one was a sales manager. And he was with us for about 7 or 8 years and instrumental in the growth of the business. Because, running retail shops and everything else that I was doing, can't run the business by myself. Got to have good people to do that. And so that's the number one lesson I would probably have learned through any of the businesses that I've had is the people that are in your organisation are going to be the make or break of that success for that business. So I grew it and scaled it in about 2013, 14, 15, we're experiencing some growing pains. We're in that 7-figure realm. We've got, thousands of clients we're providing payroll and rostering services for, and we're feeling just that pain of scalability, and we probably reached our sort of benchmark of without having to do more in the business. And we realized we probably need to spend around $1.5-2 million over the next few years to upgrade the technology, to bring on key personnel, to build some other structures in the business. And it was going to, there's probably $1 to $2 million worth of expense that we would probably need to cash flow into the business over that period of time to scale it fast. And so these two partners in the business and also the company that I work for, we'd all partnered in the business. The two guys that were employees were now, we'd sold shares in the business. And they, to hold on to them, you got to have your good people, but there's an opportunity to hold on to people for a long time if they've got some skin in the game. So they bought into the business. And we decided that rather than us all throw money in, we would actually look for some equity partners. So we raised about $2.5 million through an equity raise. We sold down some of our shares and got a bit of a payday, which was all nice for us, but also got that $2.5 million put into the business as well to help take that to the next level. That was in 2015. And part of that equity raise meant that for a period of 5 years, we weren't allowed to take any dividends. And we're all committed to seeing the company grow. And one of the equity partners came in as the managing director of the business, had a whole heap of experience in this kind of tech space. And then we also had our operations director became our CEO as well. So we kind of had two key people running the business. And I very much took a back step at that point there. But I also had BX was just launching at that time there as well. And it made a decision that I was not definitely the best person to be running the business in that space. And we know that when you start splitting your focus, it definitely impacts the growth that you have in any of the businesses you have. So
I just want to pause there for a second and just highlight a couple of things, and then we'll keep going. Just fascinating when you talk about this realization that perhaps you weren't the best person to be running the business, or that you're not always, the founders are not always the best people to be running the business. And it's very interesting because we do as entrepreneurs, as founders, get connected to our businesses as well. So I think that's a really, it's a fundamental insight that you've just talked about just then. But there is also, I think, on the one hand, you might, business owners might understand that, but then seeing someone else run their business baby without them having control can be a really hard thing from an emotional perspective, based on what I've seen again and again. So that's just one thing. Another thing I wanted to come back to, it's this interesting concept of when you get on board capital and then you're driven by the requirements of others as well, rather than just yourself at that time. But that whole 5 years, no dividends, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because then that's it. You're locked in, and you're not taking money off the table along the way. So whilst you said you got a bit of money off the table at the point of that raise, then that's it. You've got 5 years where you can't touch it again. Yeah. So that must have taken a bit of soul searching to commit to that path.
I guess it's about seeing the bigger picture. I think seeing the bigger picture in both elements, the role and the bringing on partners and the loss of control, and also the non-dividend side of it. It's about seeing the big picture. So for IWS, the big picture for us was that, hey, we could be, a small 7-figure business. We could keep sort of, growing organically, but we would never be able to go to, 8 figures and beyond if we didn't do something different. And we made a decision not to invest that money into the business. To do that, we wanted to bring partners on. And so you just have to make a decision. If you're not going to put the money down, then you kind of need to give up some of that opportunity in the short term for the long-term result. And look, it paid off tenfold in that process as well, because we then sold it 5 years later to a public, or 6 years later to a public company just last year, which is a whole another exciting element to what happened with that business. But the CEO side of it, I look at the same scenario that I looked at with IWS. I look at that with BX, and there's just, I guess, you've got to be careful of confusing your own ego with your ability, and not even your ability. In IWS, it was merely time. I didn't have the capacity to do the role. There's just no way I could have done that and done the other stuff that I was doing. I still had a few retail shops. I was just starting BX. I was already maxed with my focus, and it doesn't matter what people you've got in roles. If you're taking the senior role over leading those people, then you are going to be a cap on the success of that organisation. So it was a complete step out of IWS. I wasn't the CEO, I wasn't the managing director, I wasn't involved in strategy moving forward with that business like I certainly had been since founding it 10 years before that. So that's a pretty hard, tough position to make. But I knew where it was going as well, and I was passionate and deeply passionate about the new projects that I had involved as well. So that was good. I wasn't going to nothing. I look at the situation with BX at the moment, and we've got, we're in Australia, New Zealand, the US, we're launching in Canada, we've got some things happening across in Europe, and I'm like, I think I'm doing a pretty good job so far with it, but where's my limit of capacity? Not even capacity, experience. I've never run an international organisation before. So where is my ability to keep doing that? And I'm learning all the time. Like, you got to be open to learning. The stuff that I learn about, read about, listen to podcasts about, to get me up to speed on things, and especially when dealing in different countries, is crazy. But there's a point where you actually become the ceiling, the lid on your organisation and the success of your organisation. So I know with BX, there'll be a point in the next 3, 4, 5 years where I'm going to go, you know what, there's going to be some very clever person who can come in and run this organisation that has way more skills in international business than I do. And I can step aside and still be involved strategically and on the board, very much as my other partners might like to be as well, but not have to have the responsibility of running the business and give that to somebody who's much more skilled at doing that. Right now, that's not the time for it, because the skill set I have is still something that I can give to continue to grow that business. But I recognise in IBUS that the time had come to let go, and it's hard, because I said it's ego and experience are two critical factors. When the experience does not match what the company needs, you need to let go of the role. And I think a lot of us get caught up in the title that we have, and it's human nature. It's significance. Tony Robbins talks about the needs we have, and significance is part of that. So we get wrapped up in what that means to us. But if it's not serving us, then it's probably a good thing to let go of that and to find someone who actually can do exceptionally well out of it, and then everyone benefits. You benefit, your team benefit, your consumers benefit. Everyone benefits from that, and that's an exciting place to be in as well. And that letting go is an exciting place to be in as well. And I know with IWS, it was quite cathartic when I went, actually, I'm no longer responsible for that. Like, whew, that's actually fantastic. And I can see it grow. And I look at, the operations manager I put on 10 years before that, and 8 years before that, I saw him grow, and I, invested in the business, and then he took on the operations director role, then he became the CEO. Like, yeah, I'm enormously proud of that. Like, that's a testament to being able to allow people to grow within your team, and to see what someone like that can achieve off the back of that. Now, if I was wanted to hold on to the control of the organisation the whole time, he would never have been able to flourish like that at all. And it's pretty exciting to see where he's gone and what he's been able to achieve with the organisation off that as well.
So So out of all of this, so we've sold to a public company, and just in money, I just want to quickly come back to selling shares to employees as well, because that's, I think that, absolutely is something that lots of businesses are thinking about very sensibly. But before we get there, let's just talk about the experience in selling to a public company. Obviously, very different experience to selling the other types of businesses you had, and obviously very different buyer pools between the two. Let's talk about what, any surprises that you had in selling to a public company. How did you feel about the process?
Selling to a public company is like having a rectal exam. It's there's nothing that doesn't hit the table and see the cold light of day. It is like a grueling experience. It's very eye-opening as well. But it's full on. Like, it went on for over a year, the due diligence process for IWS.
Okay, that's even for selling to a public company. And I think, can we talk about the sale price here?
It's public. It's online, so yeah.
Yep. So a $16 million sale. Well, I can tell you right now, selling to a public company, selling to anyone, a year in DD, like, that's pretty full on.
Yeah,
that's a very long time.
It was during COVID too. That might have added to that time frame. Yeah,
right. Yeah. Yep. But I mean, hats off to you for making it through to the end there. That's it's not unusual. In those sorts of situations, in any sale of a business, it's not unusual for deals to fall through every now and again. But it's still not unusual for public companies or sophisticated buyers who might be out analysing multiple businesses at one time. And just a bit of sort of the behind the scenes information. Quite often, sometimes it can take a long period of time in DDs because they're actually running different deals at the similar time and going through DD in different organisations at a similar time. And so as a seller, just as a tip here, you have to be really careful to keep your eye on that potential pool of buyers if they drop out, because it can be absolutely horrendous emotionally if you've been through a long period of DD. And then it drops off. That's a horrible experience. But you have to hold tight and not drop your price if that's the outcome, because sometimes it can be a negotiation tactic.
Absolutely.
So a year of DD. They've investigated everything, including the kitchen sink, and you've probably learnt far more than you ever wanted to know about data rooms. Am I guessing?
Yeah. It's really interesting. Well, the strategy was when we did the equity raise, we're either going to take it public in 5 years or we're going to sell it public in 5 years. And the thing about a public organisation, when a public company when they buy an existing private entity and take it public, there's an inflationary matrix or process that happens to the value of those shares. So that from selling to a public company perspective, it's fantastic because it means that the value of your business, could go up 10 times from what it's worth at a private sale through to at when it becomes part of that public organisation. So it makes your negotiating better, and it makes so it gives you much more scope. And typically you talk about 2 or 3 times a profit multiple. Well, imagine that's going to be 10 times more when it goes public. You've got a lot more negotiating room in there as well, which means that when you take your own company public, you have that sort of inflationary benefit as well. And so that's why it was always a strategy with that. But I'll tell you what, it's a fun process to go through.
He says with his tongue firmly in his cheek. Love it. But, as you rightly say, whilst it can be a painful process when you reflect on it, generally the process, if it continues through and you get the value that had been discussed in the beginning and they don't end up dropping the price out on you at some point during the process when they feel that you're most susceptible to take it and accept it. You do have the opportunity of a much higher multiple than if you sell to a private individual buyer. So that's the win. That's the reason for it. That's why you go through that pain. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a year of DD. And in fact, that's quite often why we'll develop timelines and try and keep people in timelines, because otherwise it can be a very harrowing process when it goes on for so long. So we've talked about selling to a public company, and was that a complete exit then, or were shares?
The deal was that we ended up with both a cash payout of our shares plus some shares in the public company as well. So, and we're not allowed to do anything with those shares for a couple of years after the sale of that as well. So there was a couple of different elements there, but we don't own any shares of IWS as such. So there's no shareholders of IWS now. The public company owns all of that. But we do have shares in that public company as well. So it's, it was really like I'd never done any of that before. And hats off, obviously, to the CEO and the operations team and the team that orchestrated the deal, because obviously I wasn't as involved in that part of the process as I had been 5 years before with the equity raise and through the running of the business before that. But yeah, like it's just an amazing journey to see a business that was an idea that served my businesses and taking it to a place where it could serve, thousands of business owners across Australia, which is it's a proud daddy moment kind of thing.
100%. Such an exciting moment. And I say this all the time. I'm sure all the listeners are so sick of me saying it, but do you know what? I just love this area of law because I love deals, and I just love the joy that it really is that moment of crystallization of all of those hard years of work when you get to that point of exit, if you can do exit right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And ultimately that's what it's about, isn't it? When we're growing the business, trying to ensure that we get to that day where we look back and feel the joy that we feel like we walked the road as well as we could have at that point, at the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Really quickly, before we wrap up on this section and move to the current day business, selling shares to employees. Let's quickly look at that. Talk to us about how you came up with a value for the employees. Did they pay it up front, or did it get paid over time by dividends?
Yeah.
Talk to us about
So a combination of both those elements there. It came with IWS. It came about a little bit by twisting the arm behind the back, as well as so we got to a place where. And this can happen in an organisation as well. People feel the value they're contributing exceeds that of an employee. Like me as an employee, I always gave way more value than what I was probably being paid for. Many of us would never be paid the value in an organisation of what we're actually contributing. But I guess that's part and parcel of just what working for an employer is about sometimes. But in this instance, the employees we had, the two key drivers of the organisation working for me at the time, they were like amazing employees giving heaps of value to the business, and they wanted more than just a paycheck. And because we were a startup at the time, they weren't earning a pay packet proportionate to kind of the corporate executive salary to what they would be getting based on that as well. And so they basically said, well, look, we'd love a big pay rise, or we'd like to, buy in and get some equity in the business. And we thought about that, whether or not we could afford to give them the pay rise at the time, or whether, equity was going to actually tie them into, to one, not have to have a conversation in the future about this again, not to lose them, because there's a cost of losing great people. And so we just worked together with them to work out what the best solution for them was in terms of what they could financially afford to buy in with, because we wanted to have skin in the game. We wanted them to feel like, well, we needed them to feel financially invested, not just go, here's X percent, and by the way, you're going to pay it off over the next 5 years, because that's kind of not real then. You want them to have to put something down the table so it's skin in the game. That ties them in. Because it's easy still to walk away from something that you haven't had to put any money down for. So I feel like some skin in the game is a key element to it. But probably not proportionate to the value of the sales. Probably then you could pay those off out of future dividends in the business as well. And I reckon it's a great strategy to have either a profit share arrangement where they haven't had to physically buy in, that rewards based on performance in their capacity, or if they've got and they can financially afford to contribute to the organisation, then putting some money down in order to have that financial buy into the business. And then, whether that's for those shares or you then have the dividends pay off a higher proportion of that over time as well. But tying people in like that's so crucial.
I can't help throwing in from a legal perspective, of course, and then you always need a tight shareholders agreement so that you've dealt with issues of decision making, distributions, exit, all of those sorts of things. It's
really interesting. I'll just talk to that for just a sec as well, because my business partner in BX is Dale Beaumont. And as I said, Joanna was responsible for the negotiations on behalf of Dale, and I had my legal representation at the time. This was a couple of years ago. And Dale and I would walk in a room, shake on a deal. That's enough for us. We and that's the great thing. Actually, we're pretty good partners. I think, Dale, if you're listening, I think we run on a very similar wavelength, and we run on a very high level of integrity and trust in each other. And I feel like your word is your worth, and I get that with Dale. However, our legal agreements, our shareholders agreement, has everything in it, because I don't want to ruin the relationship with Dale because one of us doesn't understand something that we thought we did. And there's so much that goes into running an organisation and bringing together shareholders that if you don't have pretty much every single contingency that's going to happen documented in a way to handle it, then you could come to blows because there's going to be misunderstanding. And so, I know my solicitors were pretty full on in the process, and I know that Joanna was as well. It was never confrontational. It was always, there was argy-bargy kind of push and pull till we came together on stuff. But it was so crucial that we knew what was important to each other and get that articulated in a document. Whereas if we just shook hands, that would have been great. But then there's going to be situations where in the future where we're going to go, oh, well, then how do we handle this? Because this is going to cause an issue if we don't do it this way or this way. And what happens then is you actually can the relationship is destroyed over something that could have been sorted out at the beginning. And I think that's what we did it really well with Dale and I. And I think that is such a crucial part of any arrangement, whether it's an employee buying in, whether it's even just starting a new employee and the understanding that you have with them in your documents. Setting that out in the beginning is much easier than fighting it out at the end, that's for sure.
100%. It's just, I say these documents as a checklist of the sorts of things you should be talking about that you probably will never talk about unless you're forced to talk about them. And it doesn't have to be difficult, but you have that discussion once and then everyone's on the same page. And, I think law from the perspective, or documentation from the perspective of never having to need it because what it's created is an understanding between the parties, is the absolute best outcome. And that's what everyone should be aiming for ultimately. But of course, if you need to pull it out, then everyone knows where they stand.
Yes.
Okay, great, Matt. Thank you so much. What a fabulous story. I just love, that progression. And of course, we're going to have you back on our next episode of the Deal Room podcast to talk about where you are now and I guess a reflection on the learnings along the way. But in the meantime, before we get to the next episode, why don't you let our listeners know how they can find out about you and find out more about BX, because we haven't been able to talk much about BX yet. So if you're interested, make sure you come to the next episode. But also, Matt, let's tell everyone where they can find you and find information about BX.
Thanks, Joanna. Well, so as you know, BX kicked off in 2015 and is now an organisation that runs across several countries. And if you're in any of those locations, from Australia, the US, New Zealand, wherever that you're tuning into this podcast for, we'd love to have you along to one of our BX events. In fact, I was going to throw in for you, Joanna, that any of your listeners will shout them a VIP ticket with a complimentary breakfast, lunch or dinner at one of our events. if they book in, and we'll provide the links and stuff in the show notes for you as well. If you want to find out more about BX in general, you can go to bxnetworking.com, where you can find out all about BX and what we do. But make sure you look at the link there that Joanna's going to share with you, and you can grab a VIP ticket to one of our events and experience BX our shout.
Wonderful, fabulous, Matt. Thank you so much for coming along. I'm super looking forward to hearing the next installment of your story in the next episode of the Deal Room podcast. Thanks, Matt. Well, that's it for part 2 of our 3-part series with Matt Alderton. Join in for our next part, part 3, the last part of this 3-part series, where Matt and I talk all about how to build a business by learning from the past. So in this 3rd part of our 3-part series, Matt discusses his current business and international expansion and some of the important learnings he is now implementing in this new business. And in this episode, we also have a number of rapid fire questions where we compare owning a franchise to other types of businesses, the best approach to staff retention, how to maximize value in a business, and so much more. Now, if you'd like information about this topic or to connect with Matt Alderton at BX Networking, then check out our show notes, which will send you straight over to our episode page at thedealroompodcast.com. You'll also there find details of how to contact our legals at Aspect Legal about anything related to this topic, or you can head over to our website at www.aspectlegal.com.au to book a free 15-minute discussion with our legal team. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed what you heard today. We love hearing feedback, so we'd love you to leave us a review and rating if you're enjoying what you're hearing. Well, that's it. Thanks again for listening in. This has been Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time. Aspect Legal has a number of great services that help businesses prepare for a sale or acquisition, to help them prepare in advance and to get transaction ready. We've also got a range of services to help guide businesses through the sale and acquisitions process. We work with clients both big and small and have different types of services depending on size and complexity. We provide a free consultation to discuss your proposed sale or acquisition. So see our show notes on how to book a time to speak with us, or head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room Podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.